Hello and welcome to LAN 6340 3D Rendering with Vue. My name's Zane and I'm going to be your lecturer for the semester. I'm teaching this brand new paper, both for myself, teaching entirely online, and also for Unitech. First up, we're going to talk a little bit about Moodle, and just that's going to be our home base this year, and how I'm going to be posting these videos and how you're going to interact with me. We're also going to talk a little bit about Eon Software's Vue, obviously, and their websites and support forums. We're going to talk a little bit about your own personal blogs, which I'd like you to start. So that's kind of like a little effort you have to put in after this class. We're also, of course, going to have a little brief intro to Vue and get some basic skills under your belt. So first of all, let's have a little look at the website. So currently it's looking a little bit limited. But I do promise I'll add lots of content to here, links to appropriate websites and things like that. I'm also open to suggestion, so I was thinking perhaps we could try out Google Hangouts, but also just some of the services that are available in Moodle. So for example, in the classroom, you would have found this class here. At the bottom, you'll notice there's a little reply button. So if you've got any feedback or any questions related to the video, if you can just come down here, hit reply, and type your message in here. I can then see that message, it gets emailed out to me, and my reply will be visible both to you and to your classmates. I prefer this form rather than emails, just so that everybody can sort of benefit from these questions and answers. Also, you'll notice in here on the main page there's a little button here that says online chat room. So if you go click here to enter the chat now, this little window pops up and you can do real-time chat right from here, and it will pop up on my desktop if I'm online. I'm going to try to get into the habit of doing this. If you need my attention and I'm not listening, you can hit that little beep and it makes a little beeping sound. Alright, so I'm going to try to get into the habit of running that. So that's quite good, especially if you just get stuck and you just want a quick answer. Alright. I don't think there's much to say about LAN 6340 for now. There's a student cafe in here. This is basically, I'd like you to introduce yourselves, and in fact I'm going to talk about blogs in a second. In your introduction, if you could also name your blog that you're going to create, and just talk a little bit about yourself, just so that we all kind of know who's out there. You can also in there, you can organise your own events. So if you want to go meet up at Carrington's or something like that, post it in there and everyone can reply and organise some more social events. So that's entirely for you guys to play around with. Oops, I've wandered out of there. There's course announcements and news, so anything that's related to this course, for example, if I was sick or something was going to be delayed or that sort of carry on, that will be there. The assignments will be posted in here as well. I'll post the assignments separately from the actual classes, so just they'll be a little bit more concise, and there'll also be a PDF download and possibly other files related to the assignment. We got 3 assignments for this paper, and so we're going to talk about that later on as well. Alright, so let's have a little look at Eon's website. These are the makers of Vue, the software that we're going to be using this year, and they've got quite a fair few different flavors of Vue that I want to talk to you about first. So let's start off at the high end. This is Vue 11.5 Extreme. The difference between Vue Extreme and Vue Infinite is that Extreme can work within another application as well. So the standalone applications of Extreme and Infinite are completely identical. The only difference, Extreme will work as a plugin to programs such as 3D Max, Cinema 4D, Maya, etc. So if you are currently using one of these packages, you might consider using Extreme as a nice solution for you. However, I find even though I do own a commercial license of Extreme, I tend to just use the standalone product anyway. I tend to do all my modeling in Maya and ArchiCAD, and then I'll import those models into view and then create the 3D environment for them. I find that's a lot more efficient, and yeah. But if you needed the power of one of these other programs, for example, maybe the smoke effects in Maya or animation techniques and that sort of carry on, then yeah, perhaps Extreme's your best solution. You'll notice that their website, they've actually sorted this out into professions. So if you're a matte painter or an architect, or a landscape architect, you can actually see, if I can actually get to the page, landscape visualization, you can see the products that they recommend for you. Alright. There's also, if we go down here to 3D enthusiasts and artists, you'll see some much more cut down versions of the software. So in here we can see, for example, View Pioneer, which is their free version. There's basically very, very little content in these, and they're severely limited to what you can actually do. However, what do you expect for free? So it's a nice place just to kind of get your feet wet, I suppose, but yeah, you'll definitely hit limitations very quickly. View 11 Complete is another solution, which is a lot cheaper than Extreme or Infinite, and is very capable. So yeah, so you might want to consider that. But the way it does it is that it basically breaks everything down into separate packs. So if you want to start doing things with animation or export geometry to other programs, you have to buy these separately. So yeah, I think it's probably worth it, especially after you've done this course, is to purchase View 11.5 Infinite. It's relatively cheap compared to many 3D programs, and what it's capable of is phenomenal. Also, while I'm here on Eon's website, you'll see that we've also got some other resources here, including extra training material and some forums. So they have their own forums. So there's two really. Eon's forums are good. I probably use the Eon forums more just for problems with the software that I'm having. So it's a good place to check. On a more creative level, there's Cornucopia, which is kind of Eon Software's content-driven interface. So here you will find a store, forums, galleries, portfolios, and even some contests. So here you can see there's a Renaissance contest. The contests are quite cool. They're good little practice. I've done a few of them in the past and done quite well. The galleries are a nice way to, especially if you're just seeing what's possible with View. You can kind of check out scenes within here. So if you have a look, you can see like, here's a scene that somebody's posted. The cream of the crop stuff is usually some pretty spectacular imagery. Alright. And then there's your forums. So especially outside of this class, when you finish this class, this is a very good place to get support. Okay, so if you're having any issues or problems, or just want to discuss new features, that's the place to be. There's also additional videos in here as well that you can have a look at, most of which are free, and a lot of them will be related. So here you can see the making of Lost Paradise. So there's an image and somebody describing how they actually made that. So there's some fantastic resources in here. Alright, let's move on to your own personal blogs. So here's my personal blog. This is called zspace.wordpress.com. And a good thing to think about a personal blog isn't so much you trying to communicate with the world, but as a way of kind of, well, keeping a weblog, keeping like a journal, if you like, of things that you're enjoying and you've found and you want to sort of collect in one place. In this day and age, especially if you're trying to get into the job market or just trying to get freelance work, people are going to Google you. So by having your own blog, it's kind of a way of controlling the online content, or your online presence, I should say. So it's a nice way of sort of showing, you know, what you're interested in and technologies that you want to work with. Yeah, you can have, of course, not just articles, but you know, in here I've got some 3D renders that I've done. Yeah, a little bit about myself, some photography, some videos that I've produced, and yeah. So now I'd love to see you guys create your own WordPress blog. Oh, it doesn't have to be WordPress. There's Blogger, which is Google's one. I think it's Google's. There's also Tumbler if you want a much more sort of cut down, streamlined sort of thing. Sorry, hang on. If you go to Tumbler, it's at Tumbler. So Tumblr's very much, it's a little bit more social, I suppose you could say, but the very brief sort of blog. So you can put images up there and you can follow other people that you like. So all this content is just automatically generated. However, you'll see that somewhere, I haven't used it, I must admit. I tend to use my own, tend to use that zspace.wordpress.com more. But here you can see all this stuff that I've posted, you know, 5 things you should know in Photoshop, you know, bits and pieces. Actually, some of this must get automatically posted because I don't remember doing that, but anyway. So, yeah, things that you like, and you can share it. So, that's quite a nice way of working as well. Anyway, so yeah, create yourself a blog. So yeah, I'd recommend WordPress or Tumblr. Have a look at them both and see what you think. And post that into here under Student Caf, and just go to introduce yourself, hit reply. Yeah, write a little bit about yourself, you know, your name, where you work, what software you like to use, and a link to your brand new blog. Unless you've already got one, of course. Okay, so I think that's enough about blogs. Let's have a look at the actual software we're going to be using. So, now, I can't remember if I've mentioned it yet or not. You can come into Unitech and use the Unitech computers. If you aren't currently a student, you should have been sent a login and some details. Otherwise, of course, you know, use your own software at home, which is kind of the intention of this course anyway, is to give you that freedom. So here I've installed Vue 11 Infinite. This is an EDU license or an education license. So it's pretty much identical to the full-blown Vue Infinite. The only difference is it puts a little watermark in the top left corner, which it's only done since 11.5. Alright. So once that launches, and here we go. Let's close that. So here's Vue. Now, first thing you notice is we've got these 4 windows. Okay, so we've got a top view, side view, perspective view, and a front view. On the left-hand side, we've got a whole lot of tools for creating objects. And across the top we've got a few sort of settings, things like our atmospheres and materials and rendering, cut, copy, paste, undo, that sort of thing. On the right hand side, if I just create an object, so I'm just going to create a sphere just by left clicking on the sphere, you'll see that we've got a few settings in here. So we've got a little preview camera, we've got our material editor, we've got the physical properties, so this is its position. Okay, so I can actually adjust these in here. So you'll notice here the Z and the Y. So if I grab the Z, I'll be moving it in height. Okay. And your first keyboard shortcut is Shift D for drop. Oops, I'm going to double click that. Shift D for drop. There we go. We can also see we can rotate it, which for a sphere is rather boring. We can scale this object, and we can skew it. So I'm going to come back and revisit these things. Yeah, and a pivot position, so that's where the center of the object is, so how it's going to rotate around. So I can actually put this, if I go and put this at Z, actually, if we go -3, that should put the pivot point right at the bottom of the sphere, which means that now if I was to rotate this, okay, it's going to rotate around that pivot point. Alright, then finally on this we have a tab that says, it's related to animation, okay, and how it relates to other objects. So we'll talk about this in the future. Down here on the bottom right, we have, you'll notice it says layer 1. So we can group things into layers just by simply creating a new layer. And so I've got 2 spheres now. One is on layer 1 and one is on layer 2. Oops, that's my overhead camera. Okay, so it just means that I can do things like I can hide a layer. Notice when I hide it, I'm just hiding it from the 3D view. It's still going to render. I can lock that layer, which just means I can't accidentally shift it. Very handy for when you've got your your hard landscaping in, and your terrains and that sort of carry on. You're trying to manipulate objects. You don't want to accidentally move some of these things. And you can also do this on an individual object. So I can say, right, I need to lock my sun position. Okay, so I can't accidentally adjust my sun. It's even showing up anyway. There it is. Okay, so quite handy. Just really for organizing it. You should really get into the habit of naming these. So yeah, so maybe if I put these two together, then I can go and call this, if it'll let me edit it. Come on. There we go. Alright. Okay, we've also gotten here all of our materials. So at the moment this is looking a little bit boring, but we'd see all of our cloud materials and ecosystems. We can also see master objects, again a little bit boring at the moment because we don't have any master objects, and links to external things like textures and objects. So if we've gone and imported an object, there'll be a link. That link can be maintained as well. So if we go and update our building, that link will get updated and it will update in our scene as well. So it's a very convenient way of operating. Alright, the next thing I just want to talk to you about is the Gizmo. So that's what this is. So actually I'm just going to go frame selected objects. So here's my sphere. So you would have noticed that we've got a little gizmo sits in the middle. Okay, in fact you'll see here there's a little options for the gizmo. So if you don't see it, it might be switched off. That's interesting. It should have shown anyway. Oh, it wouldn't let me switch it off. Interesting. There we go. Okay, so now it's switched off. It's actually, I've never actually even switched it off, I don't believe. So, there you go. I think that button's a little bit broken, obviously. Okay, so first up, you'll notice that as you hover over these axes, you can move them in just that one axis, or in the left and right axis. Okay, you can also grab it. See, you get this little yellow highlight. That means that I'm only moving it around in that plane. Okay, so more appropriate in this perspective view. So that means that I'm moving it away from me and towards me and up and down, but not sideways. Okay, likewise I can do that. And if you, okay, so it's not going to move in elevation. Alright, now if you need to finally adjust this, the easiest way, so let's just say if I needed to finally adjust it so it was just touching the sphere, what you can do, if you hold down the command key, so notice this is the y-axis here, okay, so from the side view, so if I go to the y-axis, I can hold down the left mouse button and you can adjust this, and if you hold down the command key at the same time, it'll go in slow motion, what it should do. Yeah. You can actually grab these as well. There we go. For some reason it's not showing me it. Sometimes you just need to, okay, so if we wanted that to just touch in this axis, okay, and we want it to just touch in this axis, So that's the x-axis. Cool. And then in plan view, so that's actually lining up across there and across there. Alright. I could also remove that. Alright. So, actually, what I really intended to do was that sort of thing. There we go. Alright, so that's the basics. Now, I see I've gone and switched off my show gizmos. This is all kind of ended up a bit funny, isn't it? Come on. There we go. So, now these little controls here, this is the parent, which isn't going to make much sense. Local, global, and view. Right, so the view, let's start off with that, is going to move it around. So if I go and grab this, I'm moving it around in this view. So if my view is at a bit of a funny angle, sorry I haven't really talked about changing my view angles, but this is always going to change it relative to my view. So you can see it's actually moving in an angle. Global means that it's looking at, in fact I should do this with maybe a cube or something like that. So I'll just put a little bit of rotation on this. Global, as you notice, see it's going to let me move it sideways in the X and Y, as opposed to local, which moves the object relative to itself. Okay, oops. Okay, so that's local, global, view, which view in these cases isn't going to be much different to global, but it will make a big difference in this view. Okay, so you just want to move it sideways in the view. Okay, I need to move it up in the screen. So you can see how it's moving at a bit of a funny angle. That's because it's moving relative to my view, which my camera is over here. Alright. And parent, which is to do with objects that are parented. We'll talk about that when we talk about animation. Alright, so yeah, we've got move, rotate, and scale. Okay, so again, these all work in the same fashion. Now, a little gotcha. If we had this set to, let's say, global or view, and we change the scale in here, you'll notice that we're going to distort it. See that? Okay, so technically, if I wanted to do that, I should change it to local and adjust its scale that way. Okay, so therefore I'm not distorting it. If I have distorted it, let's say I did that by accident, didn't realize. Okay, and later on I needed to adjust this. You'll see in this parameters down here, so here's our position, rotation, scale, and here it's got what they call twist, and you'll notice that it's twisting in the Y to the X axis. So if we set that back to 0, it'll end up square again. Okay, so you can kind of see how that twists our object. So that's how you fix a twisted object. Okay, I think it's enough about navigation. Oh, one last thing. If you need to do something like quite accurately and these screens aren't big enough, just double click and it'll go full screen. Okay. If you right click with nothing selected, you can go frame all, or frame all of your objects, including my sun, which is miles away. Or I can select some objects and go frame selected objects, and they'll fit those all into frame. So very handy. And we can double click on that and it'll go back. Okay. So I need these objects, frame selected objects, boom, there we go. Alright. So let's have a little bit more fun here. Let's have a look at some materials. So I just want to set up a few little materials here. So in most cases what we would do is we'd import a model, let's say it was a house. We bring that in from our program of choice, so it might be, let's say, ArchiCAD or Revit. We'll export that as typically a 3D Studio file or an OBJ file. or if your program supports a collator, which is probably the better option. We're going to talk a little bit about importing objects later in the course, and I'll give you some objects to import, and you can import your own as well. We'd bring those in, and normally what we'd do is we'd put some basic textures on that. So for example, if I was in ArchiCAD, I could make all of the concrete white, all of the walls blue, and all of the roofs green. I'd then take that into View, and I can swap out all the concrete, all the white texture with the concrete texture, etc, etc. So applying textures is quite important. So let's have a little look here. First of all, I'm just going to double click on my material up here. So this is our material editor. Now we're going to get right into this, but for now I just want you to click on the little folder down here and load up one of the supplied textures. Okay, so I'm just going to go to basic, and we're going to use a classic, the checkerboard. Okay. Alright, and go okay. So now I've got a checkerboard attached on here. Now you can see this is actually a procedural texture, so it's not image based. If I was to put an image based one on here, you'd actually see it would look a little bit different. That's if I know what is image based. Most of these are procedural textures. The difference between a procedural texture and an image based texture is that procedural textures are using like a mathematical model, if you like. I'm not sure if you've got this texture or not, but you'll see that that's an image-based texture, and it still hasn't applied it anyway. Oh, it's probably got to do with my settings. So anyway, we can see we've got two textures in here, and if I hit render, which is this little camera here, it's going to render that up, and I can see my textures being applied to my objects. Fantastic. So at this stage, I'd like you just to sort of play around with this. You can remove textures, you can delete them, reset the material, okay, edit the material, load in materials. This is the level I want you to be at this stage. Alright. But yeah, we definitely will get into creating our own textures as well. Let's give this a nice red plastic look. Alright, and we'll make this one. So you can just go straight to load material from here if you like. Skip the whole material editor. Let's put I know, a liquid. Let's get a nice blue water. Okay. So we can also hit this render button up here. And there's our rendering. So let's have a little look at some of the things that you can import. So you'll notice some of these buttons have little triangles on them, some of them have little dots. The little triangles means that if you left click and hold down, you'll see that there's other objects that you can choose. So for example, we could choose some water, and we get an infinite plane of water, okay, which in this case is actually just above my ground plane. Okay, so if I was to render this now, we'll see our two spheres sitting just above a very thin layer of water. Alright. I could disable my ground or delete it. Okay, and it's going to look very deep because now we're not seeing that ground plane underneath. In fact, it's very, very deep. There's nothing beneath it at all. Alright, let's just switch that back on again. I'm just going to delete that C because I don't want it. We'll talk more about a lot of these objects in more depth. But for now, we're just going to go through and create some. Oops, I just accidentally created another C. So we've got another ground plane. I don't know why you'd want two ground planes, but I'm sure one day you might need it. A cloud layer. Now, I just want to talk briefly about clouds. They are fantastic, but I would highly recommend that you leave them to last. It's just that it has quite a severe impact on rendering time. Okay, so if I hit render now, you'll even see that it's taking a little bit longer to render this scene, although it does look spectacular. So let's just delete those two for now. Alright. There's also rain and snow as well, which is two new things to view 11, which are something we'll definitely visit. Alright, we've of course got these objects, and again if you left click and hold down you'll see that we've got a few other primitives. So a cylinder, square, pyramid, rounded pyramid, torus. We've also got an image plane which can be quite handy for putting posters and billboards and things like that up. And just a straight flat plane. Okay. Alright. So it's infinitely thin, those, as opposed to a cube. So we can make, a concrete slab out of that, of course. And just do my drop. Alright. So you notice how I'm just using the little handles. You've got to be a little bit careful if you're editing stuff in 3D. So I want the local controls, so that when I stretch this out I don't distort it. Awesome. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky to grab them. Okay. Let's apply a texture to that. I don't know if we've got like a nice wood texture. I'm actually working with a rather, well, I'm hoping it's not too different to yours. I think I might have a few extra ones. This is the one that I supply to my students in class. So if you come into Unitech, this is the library that you'll have access to. Where are we? Rocks, roads, plants. Here we go. Let's see. Can we get? Looks pretty limited, really. Let's just go with that. Alright. So, as you can see, we're kind of creating stuff. We've got a text tool in here, so we'll have a play around with that at some stage. But for now, you can type in text, choose a font, how you want it to look and everything. Bevels, so you can round off the edges. Let's switch it on. Cool. We can play around with the extrusion. You can even rotate it in here if you right click. Actually, that's something I still need to talk about, is moving around in these planes. Cool. And we can apply separate materials. This is an addition to its basic material. Okay, so let's say we'll give this a metal mossy chrome. Drop that into our scene. There we go. Alright, so yes. Right click will allow you to move in these views. So for example, in this view here, let's go frame all, there we go. So I can right click and just move these around. Okay, and here right click is like a tripod control, so the camera stays where it is and I can move around. The scroll wheel it moves the camera in and out. Don't get confused with zooming the camera. This actually physically moves the camera in and out. Okay, if you hold down the command key, that's how you do the zoom. So command and right click. Okay, so the camera stays where it is and we're zooming in. Okay, so I'm going to position our camera and then get like, big super wide angle shots. Okay. If you hold down the option key, you can orbit. Okay, so that's tripod control, option key, and it'll orbit. If you have something selected, it'll orbit around that selected object. Okay, and I think it's the control key, no, shift key. Shift key, and you move the camera around. Okay, so I can go sideways and up and down. Okay, we'll just go select this camera and go frame selected objects, so you can actually see what that's doing. oh sorry, shift. Okay, so you can kind of see how it's panning around, or tracking around, dolling around. Now you've also got controls over here, and you'll see me using these quite often. So this is the one that I've just been doing. Okay, so it goes left and right, up and down, and you'll actually notice that if you grab this, so if I wanted to adjust it just in height and I didn't want it to move left and right, I can grab it like that, or vice versa. I can do my little tracking shot just by grabbing the edge. Here's our move in and out, our tripod control, and our roll tool, so we can roll around. And again, if you've got something selected, it will roll around or orbit that object. Okay, and here's our zoom. Alright, and we can even save these camera settings. Alright. Okay, so here's my new camera position. We can also create new cameras just by going create camera, and it basically duplicates where we're at. Okay, so now I've got two cameras. Actually, I've got three cameras now, so you can see there's one camera, two cameras, and three cameras. Alright, let's just delete that one and that one. Alright, creating multiple cameras is very handy, especially if you have to re-render something, especially if you've been photoshopping that from that camera, and then the client asks you to make some changes. You don't want to have to try and move the camera back into the same position it used to be. By far better idea just to go in here and save that camera position. It creates a new camera. You give it a name. Oops, it'll let me. Come on. Yeah, single click. Yeah. Test cam. Okay, and you can lock that camera as well, so you can't accidentally select it. Cool, and we'll go back to our main camera, and we can then keep moving around. And there's this camera here which I can't select. Okay, can't accidentally move it, and it's locked in position. I can still delete it though. Okay, I think it's enough about that. We've also got terrains in here. So today what we're going to do is we're just going to quickly create a terrain. I'm going to do a complete session on terrains, probably next week actually. That's what I've got it scheduled for, but our schedule's a bit dynamic at the moment. So at this stage what you should do is just play around with creating some of these. There's two types of terrains. This one here is based on a height map. It's called a standard terrain, and there's also a procedural terrain, which is based on a fractal. The advantages of the fractal one is that you get infinite levels of detail, okay, and it will dynamically change it. In fact, if I double click on this, you can see that here's our camera, and we've got more detail up close to the camera, and then as it moves away, you can see the resolution of this terrain disappearing, whereas this one here, very simple and very basic. Okay. When we do talk about the terrain editor, we'll have a little play around in here, and I'll show you how you can sculpt and move and play around with this. Okay. And by all means, have a little bit of a play in it, but I want to do a formal class on it. All right. You can see already we've got something interesting happening. Okay, so that's creating some materials, creating objects. We've got a few other little things here. Now these ones here, you'll notice have got a little dot next to them. That means that they're part of a library. If you left click, it'll load the last object that you created. Hang on. Let's just grab our spheres here. All right. And I'm just going to go right, frame selected objects, there we go. In fact, I can just go click on balls, which isn't a very good name for it, and it make it a lot quicker to select all of those items because they're all on the same layer. Alright, sorry, I've lost my train of thought now. Oh, that's right. When you go and create a new object, you'll notice that it appears in the center of the view. Okay, so it's a center of here, center, center. Okay, so if you're wondering why your object appeared miles away, that's usually why. If we right click on here, we get our plant library. So here we can see we've got kind of broken down into sort of major types of foliage, aquatic, bushes, flowers, etc., etc. And so we can grab some of these. We're going to talk a lot about foliage, obviously. There's 3 different ways you can really apply foliage. Either like this, so you can grab an individual plant and place it into your scene. My library seems to be going quite slow for some reason. I think that's probably because it's one of the first times it's been run, perhaps. It's making thumbnails. Don't know. But yes, you can create them individually. You can paint them on, so we can actually set up kind of like a little ecosystem and then paint these ecosystems on. And there's 2 ways of doing that with this tool here, or we can do it as a material, or we can create kind of a set of rules. That's what the ecosystems really are all about. It's setting up a material with a whole lot of rules that we can then apply to an object. So typically that would mean that if we had an imported object and it had some grass, we could change the grass material for an ecosystem that had real grass on it, or 3D grass on it. Alright, so here we can see we can position it just like anything else. Now, one thing I just want to show you, if I go and drag a copy, okay, so I don't know if you've noticed, I think I did that before with the sphere. No, I didn't, I created a new one, didn't I? If I drag a copy, so that involves me holding down the Option key and dragging out a copy. These 2 are absolutely identical. See how you can actually see that there and that there are identical. However, if I just delete that one, if I go and click this again, I get a unique looking tree. And that's because the way that view works is quite unique, is that these are like a species. So they're kind of based on a set of rules. Okay, apart from this one that's actually floating up in the air. Shift D, drop it. Okay, and so you can see that all of these trees are very, very similar, but they are slightly different. Okay, so they're kind of a bit more like real plants, really. So we can also have a look if we double click on this, and again we're going to do a class on this. We can see this is pretty cool. We can change the length. Okay, so this is basically changing the length of everything, but we can change it for just the stems, so we can make like a unique looking plant. Cool. We can give it more fall off and start twisting these things around so they're all kind of a bit crazy. Maybe it's been through a few storms. We can increase the diameter, so we can make them much fatter. We can droop them more. Okay, we can even change the angle, so maybe they all go at a kind of crazy angle. It's looking a bit crazy now, isn't it? Alright, and there's also controls for the leaves. So I hit OK, and you can see that now we've just created kind of a unique looking weather beaten palm tree. Okay, which looks quite different to these other ones. So we've got a lot of control over plants. So we're gonna have a bit of a play around with that in the future. We've also got here rocks. So again, if you left click, it will just create the last rock that was used. Or if you right click, you can choose from a selection in the same fashion that you did for the trees. So here's my rock. I can make it a bit bigger. Alright, so if we right click on there, you can see we've got a whole bunch of different types of rocks. And again, these are procedural, so every time I generate one, it's slightly different. Okay, we can sink these guys down to the ground a little bit. It's always quite nice. Alright. Oops, they're still floating up in the air. Remember, you can select them from down here as well, so I'm just holding down the shift key to select them both. I'm just going to drop them down into the ground plane. Cool. And just pop them down in the corner there. Alright. Clouds, so again, right click, you'll load up different types of clouds. Now some of these see 40 to 150 spheres. That's a heck of a lot. It would look fantastic, but I'd probably avoid it. Here we go, here's a nice little puffy cloud, 1 to 5 spheres, so I hit OK. Here's our little cloud, and I can position that wherever I want, and I can make it bigger and smaller. So let's say I'm going to position it just above this mountain here, make it a bit bigger. Or maybe get it into that saddle, looks quite nice, doesn't it? Okay, so there's a little bit of cloud in there, and you can see that in the rendering. And finally we've got planets. That's interesting, it doesn't actually. If we click on there, you can create a planet, and you can choose different ones. But usually it's the moon. But you can put different images in here if you. So click on here. There you go. So it could be Jupiter, Mars, etc., etc. Goes Saturn. Looking cool. Alright, so there's Saturn sitting on the horizon. What else? Okay, next thing I just want to talk about briefly, I know we've been going for a little while, is just the rendering settings. So, first of all, let's just right click on the camera this time. Now, I'm going to get into depth with this at some point, but today we're just going to flip this over to Final, so this will be a much better rendering quality. I use Final a lot, even I only use Broadcast or higher if I'm starting to see some strange artifacts, which I'll talk about when we talk about advanced rendering. I'm going to also render to screen, so instead of just rendering this little window, it's going to render in its own little screen. And I'm going to say 800 by 450 will be fine for now. But you can set this to a physical size, so you can see it. If this was 300 dpi, this would be a very small image at the moment. Okay, 2.5 centimeters by 1.5 centimeters. However, for screen, oops, that's a bit odd. Oh, anyway. So 800 by 450 is what I'm going to be using for now. Full HD is 1920 by 1080. If there's a resolution in there that isn't, like for example, 720p is not there for some reason, so you can go 1280 and it should go 720. Cool. In fact, let's go with that. Hit render. Cool. And here it is. So we can see a little bit of cloud. A planet. Now, a funny looking modified palm tree. There's our chrome text, etc., etc. And our ball of water. Alright. Not exactly the most stunning of images I've ever created. Alright, so the final thing I want to talk about is the atmosphere settings. Now the atmospheres in View control not just clouds and the colour of the sun, that sort of thing, but also the lighting techniques. So I just want to create a little scene here. I'm just going to reset his material because I just want it to be very plain. Okay, and I just want to create a few more little boxes here because I just want to create some shadows or areas of shadows. Where are we? Let's just create a box. Let's just delete that. Let's go frame, except for the cloud. Actually, I might just move this cloud up into this. That means I can just go bang and everything's selected. Frame selected, objects. I've got my planet in there as well. Move him into there. Cool. Alright. So I'm just going to create a few extra little things in here. So in fact I might just use this cube. I want to reset its rotation. So easiest way, if I just go into here, I can just go 0. Cool. I'm just going to create myself a little wall. Excellent. And we'll lift that up. I also want to reset this material. Okay, so we've got a, and now I'm just going to drag a copy of this over to here and rotate it. Oops, undo. Rotate it. If you hold down the shift key, it should lock to 90. There we go. And another copy of it over on this side. Now, the reason I've done that is because I just want to show what happens when objects are in shadow. So, these are our standard settings. Now, let's just have a look in here. If you left click on here, you can edit your atmosphere, and you'll see things like the sun's position, light, clouds, all sorts of controls. And we're going to do a big session on this, but for now I just want to talk about the different types of lighting. So across the top here are our atmosphere models. Standard is incredibly basic and it looks hideous. Volumetric is good for volumetric lighting, although it hasn't really been used for a while. Spectral model, you'll find, is by far the best rendering engine. Really nice looking atmospheres. These ones are just kind of out of date, really. Environment mapping is used for creating an image or an HDR dome over your entire scene, and we'll look at that and then when we start doing a little bit more advanced rendering. But for now I just want to use spectral model, and global ambience is what we're using currently. So standard is the most basic. Global ambience, so it's actually putting in ambient light in areas. Ambient occlusion, now this is set by default to 20 meters, which isn't really going to illustrate it, but I'm going to render with ambient occlusion on now anyway. What ambient occlusion is it tries to sort of fake how you get dark shadows underneath objects. Also, if you've got a light object next to another area of shadow, you'll get a kind of a highlight happening. So this is kind of it's just faking it. You can actually do this in post-production as well, and perhaps we'll do that with when we start looking at compositing. But we should see, actually I need some more light to be hitting my sphere over here for it to show. But my main point is that at 20 meters we're not really going to see this effect. Okay. In fact, I just want to do a couple. So that's our ambient occlusion. Hang on, let's just left click on this, go global ambience, and we'll render really just for reference more than anything. And I also just want to change the position of my sun a little bit, just so that I just wanted to hit the sphere a bit. So I've got an area in shadow. And in fact, let's reset the texture on this one as well. In fact, I might just delete that one and we'll drag a copy. So that one should be just hitting a little bit more light. And we'll grab this guy. Let's go frame selected objects. Okay, and we'll just move him over here and just make him a little bit bigger. Cool. Go drop. Alright. So, this is our global ambience render, and we'll hit render, and we'll just see how long that takes. So I've got a little cloud in there. No texture on our background mountain, which is a little bit boring, isn't it? Alright, so there's our reference. It took 669,000 polys and it took 13 seconds to render that. Just hit, actually I'll talk about that window I just closed there in a second. So let's just left click on here, and we're going to change this to Ambient Occlusion. So this is Ambient Occlusion with the default setting. So you'll notice that it's doing a lighting pass first. So here it's actually looking at indirect lighting, and it's illuminating these objects accordingly. Alright, and we can see that that one took 28 seconds to render. So yeah, this post-processing, typically what I would do is turn that auto exposure off. It just means that if you are overlighting your scene, you don't really want it being adjusted in post-processing, you want to be able to see it. However, if it's kind of a case of a bit bright, we can darken it there as well. Okay, so you can kind of see, in fact, maybe a little bit would be nice. But I'm just going to leave that at 0. Natural film response just kind of makes it react a little bit more realistically. Okay, so you can kind of see it's a little bit more contrasty. The shadows are a bit darker, the highlights are a bit more blown out. And we'll hit OK. We're going to definitely talk about this window. Alright, so let's just close that one, and this time we're going to change it to the range to 1 meter, and we'll see that it makes quite a difference. At least I'm hoping it does. So again, it's running through its lighting pass. Now this time you'll see there's a little bit happening around the edges here. So we're getting these highlights and shadows added. So what it's doing is it's faking the effect. So you can see there's a slight shadow underneath our sphere there. Okay, there's a little bit of darkening and lightening here. Doesn't always work though. It is kind of faking the effect of light illuminating an object and then having an effect on its neighbouring objects. Okay, but you can see there's quite a big difference between 20 meters and 1 meter. Okay, so there's our standard and global illumination. So you can see it looks a lot more grounded. Okay, here it looks almost as if it's floating. And let's left click again. So this is global illumination. So this is using the atmosphere to illuminate the scene as well. So we'll probably find that the atmosphere being very bright blue, you might get a slight blue tinge, but we'd also get a lot more illumination in the shadows. And there should be some natural darkening under objects as well, as it's less exposed to the atmosphere, to the sky, if you like. And there we go. And so that's taken 29 seconds to render. Okay, so here's our original, and here's our global illumination. There's a little bit more contrast in it. Oops. Now, so yeah, global illumination is nice. And here's the creme de la creme, global radiosity. Now, the way that global radiosity works is quite different. As light comes into a room, for example, it'll come in, it hits an object, that object then gets illuminated, and it illuminates the objects around it. So what we'll see here, for one, is it's going to, so I'm just going straight with the default settings here, and we'll hit render, we should see the light hitting this wall and then illuminating this sphere. And also we might get a little bit underneath here, might lighten up. You can really see it happening in here. See the lights bouncing around in this corner and illuminating that corner. This area is getting a little bit darker. Okay, the lighting pass itself just looks fantastic. You can see the colour coming off here, so the light's hitting this green and then making green light scatter around it. And now we have a very, very realistic image. Wow, this might be a bit of a stretch. And our rendering time has gone through the roof. So we've gone from 28 seconds to 35 seconds. Okay, but you can see, 13 seconds to 35 seconds. So we've more than doubled our rendering time. So although radiosity is fantastic, you might want to leave it to last because it gets a little bit frustrating when every time you hit render it takes forever. So I quite often just go into those settings and flick it back and forth. If you want to have a little bit of fun, by all means, if you right click on here, you can load some presets, and there's some very, very cool ones. If you have a look under daytime, we've got spectral sunshine. So that's ambient occlusion, global illumination. If it hasn't got that, it's usually a standard or atmosphere, or what's it called? Global ambience. Okay, so here's a global radiosity one. In fact, there's a couple in here, and I don't know what the relationship is, but I've come across some that actually have New Zealand names in it. And I'm not sure how it ended up that way. I can't find it now, but if you find it, let me know. But yeah, one of these, it says something about Napier, I think it is. Don't know. But yeah, so you can try out some of these atmospheres. There's some special effects ones, like God rays. These look fantastic, but take a phenomenal amount of time to render. Okay, so we're going to render that one. So this is using God rays. God rays are basically, it's a sort of an effect you get when the light comes through clouds and illuminates the atmosphere. And yeah, it's a very spectacular looking thing, but as you can already see, it will take a while to render. Okay, so we're going to leave that rendering. And next week, we will be doing terrain editing and playing around with the amazing tools in there, doing procedural terrains and standard terrains, and seeing what's possible. So until then, I look forward to seeing all your imagery, and yeah, until next week. Bye.